if it's important to our nation.
The country is facing yet another unprecedented crisis.
It's on Face the Nation.
You heard the president. Where do you think this stalemate goes from here?
Making politics make sense.
What do you think happened here?
The why behind the biggest stories. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Dozens of Netflix employees staged a walkout over Dave Chappelle's recent special. They say the comedian made transphobic comments and are calling on Netflix to remove the special. Organizers say that they plan to present the company's CEO with a list of employee demands, which includes asking the streaming giant to produce more LGBTQ content. Netflix responded saying in part, quote, "We value our trans colleagues and allies and understand the deep hurt that's been caused. We have much more work to do, both within Netflix and in our content." In Health Watch, researchers have developed a new surgery that uses genetically modified animal organs in humans. They hope that the new surgery will prevent people from dying while waiting for kidney transplants. CBS News chief medical correspondent Dr. John LaPook reports.
This experimental surgery is setting the stage for a revolution in organ transplantation.
The single biggest problem in transplantation is the lack of organ availability for all the people who need it.
There are almost 100,000 Americans waiting for a kidney donor. Dr. Robert Montgomery led the team which, for the first time, successfully transplanted a non-human kidney into a human. The human immune system rejects organs from animals. But Dr. Montgomery and his team at NYU Langone's Transplant Institute genetically modified a pig kidney to make it more compatible. The researchers connected the pig's kidney above the thigh of the recipient, outside the body, so they could see and test it.
So you plug this all in, and what happened?
The kidney turned a beautiful pink color. We were sort of taking in what we were looking at, which was incredible. It was a kidney that was immediately functioning. So we came up with this idea of testing it first in someone who is recently deceased but is being maintained on a ventilator.
The family consented and donated the body for this study.
They felt really strongly that this would be something that she would want.
Before this first attempt, NYU created a new board, consulting with religious and legal experts and with bioethicists, like Dr. Art Kaplan, who heads the medical center's ethics division.
Do you have any second thoughts whatsoever that this was the right thing to do, ethically?
I think we should be doing it more often. What we have here is absolute certification of death, complete voluntarism on the part of the people involved in the experiment with permission and enthusiasm that they want to help.
Without genetic modification, a transplanted pig kidney would likely have been rejected within minutes. This kidney worked perfectly for 54 hours before being disconnected.
What could it mean?
Could mean that no one will need to die waiting for an organ anymore.
Dr. John LaPook, CBS News, New York.
Coming up after the break, another Michigan town with dangerous drinking water, why Congress has been slow to act. Plus, bottlenecks at shipping ports continue to hurt American consumers and businesses. We'll speak with the executive director of one of the country's busiest ports about the plan to fix delays. You're streaming CBSN.
An original documentary on CBSN.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future?
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now. An original documentary on CBSN.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway.
You've trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor, go get a serving job. Like, why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
Everything was on fire.
You're left making decisions you don't want to make.
If we're at war at fire, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to take a lot of casualties, and we're going to lose. We got to do something about it.
If it's important to our nation,
The country is facing yet another unprecedented crisis.
it's on Face the Nation.
You've heard the president. Where do you think this stalemate goes from here?
Making politics make sense.
What do you think happened here?
The why behind the biggest stories. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Americans are seeing higher prices on a range of goods due to inflation and supply chain issues. The backlog is not only hurting consumers, but also many businesses across the U.S. Carter Evans reports from Denver.
We should not have empty shelves. That's not a good sign.
Ed O'Brien's Denver company makes some of the most popular outdoor toys on the market, but it's on track for a sales decline of 40%. Well, you don't have a demand problem. People want to buy your product.
Yeah, it's a supply problem.
That's because he has no idea when his toys will arrive from China.
We still have containers that we placed orders for March and we have not seen, and we don't know where they're at.
And because of the huge port backlog, he's paying more for shipping than ever.
The cost for a container shipping out of China was $6,500 from China to Denver.
How much is it now?
It's $30,000.
How much have you lost this year?
We have faced over $2 million of unexpected expenses.
He cannot raise prices on deals he's already made.
I'm scrambling for friends and family money, banks, everything else to get additional money just to keep the business going.
Nationwide, suppliers cannot get items to stores fast enough because there's a shortage of warehouse workers and truck drivers with more than 500,000 job openings.
Companies almost certainly won't be able to fill all the roles they hope to this holiday season.
Andy Challenger with outplacement firm Challenger Gray and Christmas says companies are trying to entice workers. Amazon is offering signing bonuses up to $3,000 and starting wages up to $22 an hour. Walmart and Target are offering free college tuition.
What it's mostly doing is hiring away workers from their competitors, and that's why we're seeing some of the highest quits rates that the country's ever recorded.
In order for Ed O'Brien's business to survive, he says he has no choice but to raise prices in the future.
I would say at least 25% across our board, at least.
And that's just one company. Small businesses simply cannot absorb cost increases this big. They have to pass them on to shoppers, and it's why experts are telling us that sticker shock is going to continue into next year. Lana?
Wow, Carter, thank you. Last week, President Biden announced workers in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, California, are moving to 24/7 operations to clear a supply chain logjam. Both ports account for nearly 40% of the nation's imports. According to the White House, working longer hours will help ease supply chain bottlenecks and speed up shipments of goods throughout the country. For more on all this, I want to bring in Mario Cordero. He is the executive director of the Port of Long Beach in California. Mario, so glad to have you on to discuss how this 24/7 plan is being carried out at your port. Tell us, what impact do you believe it will have on these supply chain issues?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think clearly we all agree we're in a national crisis, and better said, an international crisis, because this is an item that has impacted the international supply chain. And the root of it is COVID-19 in terms of what we experienced last year and continue to experience regarding some of the factors related to this situation. But suffice to say that here at the Port of Long Beach, at the nation's largest port complex, we're moving forward to explore all options in terms of how we move this cargo and expedite the cargo. And one of the ways that I've suggested, and of course President Biden has now directed in terms of how do we move forward to 24/7 operations. Now, we have a pilot project right now with a terminal here at the Port of Long Beach, Total Terminals International, and I'd like to thank them for stepping up. But again, this is not going to be easy. The supply chain needs transformational change, but on the other hand, it's going to take the whole supply chain to buy into a 24/7 operation. And all I can represent at this point, the good news is there's commitments to do that by stakeholders. So it will be a process, but on the other hand, for us to do nothing is not an option.
Well, we appreciate that commitment. But as you say, Mario, it's not just about your port. There's a shortage of skilled port workers. There's a shortage of truck drivers. How is all of that impacting operations and this problem?
Well, as you referenced, it's a perfect storm. There's a confluence of factors in terms of why we're in the situation we're in. And one of those is the shortage of labor. And, the port industry is not immune to the overall labor shortage that we're experiencing across the country. Now, I will say that the men and women who work on the docks here, the IOW, those men and women have been working day in, day out to move this cargo since the beginning of this pandemic. So with regard to labor that you see on the docks, we really don't have a shortage there, and that's the reason why I think that we're ready to move forward and explore a 24/7 framework. But you correctly assessed that the supply chain is problematic regarding some of the shortages we have, more specifically truck drivers and in the warehouse component of this goods movement system.
And Mario, you heard in Carter's report that shipping costs for that businessman jumped from $6,500 to $30K. Will this 24/7 plan help bring these prices down, or is that just the new brutal reality of the situation?
Well, one of the things that your viewers have just witnessed is the Amazon process. A couple of years ago, I referenced the Amazon state of mind only because Amazon changed everything. It's a 24/7 operation. Mm-hmm. And one of the factors that has us in this situation is, on the good news, the trajectory of the economy. And by that, I mean the consumer appetite and demand. As consumers, we shop 24/7. We shop online, whether it's 10 p.m. from your home or 4 in the morning. So part of this factor is the elevated consumption or demand by consumers here, particularly in the United States. We have anywhere from a double-digit 14 to 15% increase in retail sales. And again, 20% increase in the use of e-commerce, specifically online. So these are other factors that, again, will drive us to make sure that we change to a extended hour operation, which I call a 24/7 framework, so that, again, short term is going to be difficult, but we have a full court press with our stakeholders to try to make something work on this. But midterm and long term is going to be the right decision.
It sounds like what you're saying is that you'll work to clear these bottlenecks, but as far as what the shipping costs are, that's something that's still yet to be determined. Is that right?
Well, I think the shipping costs they'll taper down as we move forward into the next year, because obviously these kind of costs are not sustainable. But on the other hand, again, I think we'll get back to some form of normalcy, maybe in the summer of next year. And by that, I mean that will have an impact on reducing the shipping costs that we've witnessed and experienced here, particularly in the last 8 months.
So the Biden administration is promising a 90-day sprint. You're fully charged up and ready to be part of that sprint to eliminate these bottlenecks. But that still puts us in January, Mario. Do you expect that these issues will be resolved by that point? And if we're really looking at January, what could this mean for the busy holiday season?
Well, one thing for sure, I think for those of us who shop last minute, including myself, this is not the year to do that. But on the other hand, again, what the good news is, I think the administration brought some key stakeholders together that are committed and are collaborating to address this issue. So this is a crisis. And so with that, all I can represent is that we are working 24/7 in terms of trying to find solutions and looking to the best ways that we could immediately deal with this scenario in the short term. But again, this is a global issue. So it doesn't start here with the terminals, but the good news is we have signaled that we're willing to do what we can by having extended hours to commence having a domino theory of an impact on the supply chain.
Mario Cadero, really appreciate you coming on and talking to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
The city of Hamtramck became the latest community in Michigan to report high levels of lead in its drinking water Wednesday. The town joins Belton Harbor and Flint, Michigan. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Nora O'Donnell reports.
We went to Capitol Hill to get answers and find out why Congress has been slow to act and slow to help communities like Benton Harbor, Michigan, the predominantly black town where thousands of residents have water contaminated with lead. Omar Villafranca was there last week.
What water do you use to cook?
The bottled water.
To brush your teeth?
Bottled water.
Bathe?
Bottled water.
Thank you for having me. Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib has been pushing to get more money to fix the problem.
We talked to the mayor of Benton Harbor. He said they need help now. And, you know, I tell him I feel it. I'm here, and I'm moving with a sense of urgency.
In her state, more than 3 in 4 kids tested had detectable levels of lead in their blood.
If I'm a parent in your state, I'm like, what's Congress doing? Why are you taking so long? And I think that's why when you talk to my residents and they're saying, we get it, you get it, Rashida, but what's going on with the rest of them? Don't they know this is happening? And that's where the frustration comes in.
Frustration because Tlaib doesn't think there's enough money in the bipartisan infrastructure plan to replace all of America's lead pipes.
We know when we see $15 billion only in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we saw who put that together. We saw the folks that don't look like us that put that together. And when we talk about equitable distribution, $15 billion is not going to get us closer to that. I mean, it will not help black and brown communities. It isn't. It's communities like ours that continue to be left behind. But we know with more funding, we have a better chance. So you're putting more money for lead pipes in the Build Back Better plan. Yes, another $30 billion, which gets us closer to truly getting lead out of water.
It would cost an estimated $60 billion to replace all lead service lines in the U.S., and the EPA says 6 to 10 million homes across the country have lead pipes. So we're going to be interested to see how Congress acts. Lana?
Nora, thank you. A worsening hunger crisis is sweeping through Afghanistan. The United Nations says 95% of Afghans are facing starvation, and some of these most at risk are young children. MTS Tayyab spoke with some families in Kabul who say that they are desperate for help.
There are few greater agonies for a mother than a sick child. 6-month-old Sophia suffers from severe anemia caused by acute malnutrition. Her mother, Arezo, says, "We just didn't have enough money to feed her." Her father, Baba Shireen, tells us he's desperate.
What sort of help does your family need right now?
He says, "I need food. I have 5 kids. They're all so hungry." Hunger and poverty have long stalked Afghanistan's children, but since the Taliban seized power 2 months ago, the nation is spiraling into a deep humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, if urgent humanitarian assistance doesn't come soon, more than 1 million children will die from malnutrition. Signs of desperation can be seen in every corner of Afghanistan. This USAID-funded World Food Program distribution center is packed, but all that's on offer are sacks of flour and a bit of salt. Wahid Ahmed Darwesh is one of the organizers.
People come here because they're hungry, they need food. But all you're able to give them is flour and salt.
Right now, not enough, but it has saved their life.
While we were talking, the Taliban arrived.
The Taliban make problem every day as well.
This is Taliban? And what are they saying?
Oh, they say stop.
Filming?
Yeah, we should continue later.
We overheard one Taliban fighter ask his commander if he should kill us. It was time for our crew to leave. As the group tightens its grip on power, Afghanistan is barely holding on. The Biden administration has already frozen $9 billion in assets, and along with other nations says any future financial support is conditional on the Taliban proving it's moderated since it was last in power. Zabihullah Mujahid is the Taliban's chief spokesman.
The United Nations is warning over 1 million children will die from malnutrition if nothing urgent is done. Can the Taliban solve this crisis without the help of the world and the United States?
He says, on the one hand, they say 1 million children will die, but on the other, the U.S. are holding our money. The U.S. should release our money so we can save our children. This month, world leaders promised $1.2 billion in aid to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe across Afghanistan. But it won't do much to bring the economy back from the brink. And won't be enough to help the country's smallest and most vulnerable. I'm Imtiaz Tayeb in Kabul.
In the UK, COVID cases are on the rise again, and as CBS News contributor Simon Bates points out in this week's London Calling, COVID fatigue is also worsening. As a reminder, Simon's opinions are his own and don't necessarily reflect all of us at CBSN.
Here in Britain, all the signs are pointing in one direction. That when it comes to the virus, we may have taken our eye off the ball much too soon as we head into what is threatening to be a problematic winter. 3 months ago, in a move that some described as bold, but others labelled reckless, Boris Johnson's government removed most of the remaining restrictions and declared Freedom Day. He wanted to get our battered economy up and running again, and he saw an opportunity in the middle of the summer to pounce. For a while, it worked fine. But now the days are getting shorter, winter's approaching, and the virus is spreading throughout the land. Daily infections are rising again, and the number of hospital admissions is starting to tick upwards. The kids went back to school, passed it on to each other, and brought it home. But Prime Minister Johnson doesn't seem that worried. His spokesman said that he is keeping a very close eye on the numbers. Not a bad idea. But there seems to be no sense of urgency in his government. It's staking everything on our vaccination program, preventing most people from getting very sick. It's also trying to speed up the boosters for mainly old people and the jabs for teenagers. Meantime, our leading scientists are nervous that our hospitals could become overwhelmed in a few weeks. But maybe Britain's suffering from something else. A severe case of virus exhaustion. Not a recognized condition, but one I've recently identified, consisting of too much media coverage of the virus, too many slides showing soaring infection rates, too many gloomy reports from experts. Many people here just want it all to go away, to return to life as before, to put an end to all the bad news, to act as though it's over, even though it isn't. That's London Calling for today. This is Simon Bates for CBS News in Devon.
We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the rest of the day's news. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
An original documentary on CBSN.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What are you worried about?
Me living here in the future?
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now. An original documentary on CBSN.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway. You trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor, go get a serving job. Like, why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
Everything was on fire.
You're left making decisions you don't want to make.
If we're at fire, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to take a lot of casualties, and we're going to lose. We got to do something about it.
If it's important to our nation,
The country is facing yet another unprecedented crisis.
it's on Face the Nation.
You heard the president. Where do you think this stalemate goes from here?
Making politics make sense.
What do you think happened here?
The why behind the biggest stories. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
In Climate Watch, the world's 1.4 billion cows are a major source of greenhouse gases. They account for about 40% of global methane emissions. Mark Phillips traveled to Scotland, where he met the scientists hoping to cut cattle methane in half.
Depending on how you feel about meat, this is either a scene from carnivore heaven or it's a vision of the road to hell. Cattle graze on the lush green pastures of Scotland. The environmentalists will tell you that when it comes to global warming, meat, and especially beef, is among the worst foods we can eat. That the methane cows belch out while turning feed into food is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than even the carbon dioxide produced by burning fossil fuels. So the challenge is to satisfy the world's ever-growing appetite for beef while also producing less methane. And here at this experimental farm run by Scotland's Rural College, they think they found a way. Because it turns out, one cow is not like another. Did it surprise you? You looked at one cow and you thought, holy cow.
Yeah.
This stomach content is a lot different than this cow than it is in that cow.
There's a huge variation in the stomach.
It's all about the stomach. Well, stomachs. Cows have 4 of them.
We are putting in...
Rainer Roa is a researcher at the college and has been studying the digestive process in cows, and he's found that the microbes in their stomach not only vary from cow to cow, they determine how much methane the cow produces. And Rainer Roa's work shows that genetics can predict which animals will have the right microbe cocktail to produce the least methane. In other words, you can breed low methane producing cattle. How much less?
We are predicting that we are reducing methane by 50%.
Still, a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas production is not the same as a 100% reduction, which is what we would get if we just stopped eating the stuff. Mark Phillips, Scotland.
Coming up in our next hour, it's Red and Blue. Americans still stuck in Afghanistan. How one woman escaped the Taliban and the Army veteran working to help others. All that and more coming up next on Red and Blue.
An original documentary on CBSN.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future?
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now. original documentary on CBSN.
50 shows running, the lights blinking.
People fight their entire career to get to Broadway. You trained your entire life.
Spotlights, drama, passion.
This is what we live for.
Until COVID turned off the lights.
It's like going from a bright light to pitch black.
Scenes from Broadway's unique struggle with COVID.
It was devastating.
Broadway contributes about $15 billion to New York City's economy and 100,000 jobs.
The sound team, the lighting team, everyone.
The world does not realize how big this is.
This is how we make money.
This is a specialized industry. You don't tell a doctor to go get a serving job. Like, it just, why are we different?
Are we going to be able to pay our rent? Am I going to have food?
What will happen in Broadway's new opening act?
We're in uncharted waters again.
The show must go on.
There is reason to hope again.
I think people are going to be crying. I know I will.
An originals documentary on CBSN. Stream now.
Everything was on fire.
You're left making decisions you don't want to make.
If we're at war or fire, we're going to spend a lot of money, we're going to take a lot of casualties, and we're going to lose.
We got to do something about it.
If it's important to our nation,
The country is facing yet another unprecedented crisis.
it's on Face the Nation.
You heard the president. Where do you think this stalemate goes from here?
Making politics make sense.
What do you think happened here?
The why behind the biggest stories. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
CBS News.
This is what fire crews are up against.
The highest quality journalism.
It explains not just who or what or where, but why.
CBS News. This is why.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden is on the road again to sell his economic plan directly to the American people. He spoke in his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, to tout his multi-trillion-dollar social and climate package, even as he's actively involved in negotiating it within his party.
These bills are not about left versus right, or about moderate versus progressive, or anything that pits one American against another. These bills are about competitiveness versus complacency. They're about expanding opportunity, not having opportunity denied. They're about leading the world and continuing to let the world or let it pass us by. And by the way, they will not increase one single penny of the deficit. They are.
After a flurry of meetings and negotiations, Democrats are sounding more united on the president's social and climate spending plan. President Biden outlined a new framework to Democrats Tuesday. We're now getting a sense of some of the items that may or may not be included in the final bill. Party leaders say they'll present an outline by week's end. New polling from Politico and the Morning Consult shows just 38% of voters believe the country is heading in the right direction. That is a potential liability for Democratic control of the House and the Senate heading into the midterms. The Washington Post reports that over 1.7 million migrants along the Mexican border have been detained during fiscal year 2021. The last time numbers were that high, Ronald Reagan was president. The biggest change since then, the Biden administration's enforcement of Title 42. That is a Trump-era policy allowing the U.S. to expel people before they can request asylum. Immigration experts say that leads people to repeatedly cross into the U.S. Plus, hours after the House Capitol Riot Committee held contempt hearings for former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, Mark Meadows is lawyering up. The former White House Chief of Staff is retaining George Terwilliger, who served as Deputy Attorney General under President George W. Bush. Let's bring in Chris Van Cleve, Natalie Jennings, and Tim Pucco. Chris is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Natalie is deputy Washington editor at the Washington Post, and Tim is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to you all. Chris, let me start with you. President Biden laid out a rough framework for his social spending plan. What is the latest price tag, and what do we know about which programs seem to be making the cut?
Well, Elena, we have to preface this with the negotiations are still underway, so what's in today could be out tomorrow. But right now, what our CBS News teams at the White House and here at the Capitol are hearing, you're looking at a bill that's probably going to come in between $1.75 and $1.95 trillion. The president has been referring to it as a $2 trillion package. And because that's substantially smaller than that $3.5 trillion, that means some things are going to have to come out and some programs are not going to run as long. I've got my cheat sheet here because things keep changing. But, what we're hearing is the goal from the president is to have an agreement in place, at least in principle, and a public agreement on things so that a vote could happen on the infrastructure bill by October 30th. That's ahead of the president's international trip, and it would be a victory for a White House that could certainly use one. Family leave is looking like it's staying in, but it's going to get considerably shorter. It had been maybe 12 weeks now, closer to 4 weeks. There'll be a means test at about $100,000 as a cap. Child tax credit staying in, but likely going to be extended for 1 or 2 years. There had been hope of making that permanent, but still extending it gives something that's very popular to people that are running for a re-election for sure there. Funding for childcare and universal pre-K is still under discussion. It sounds like universal pre-K is likely to stay in, but those details are still being debated. Climate change, that's a big part of this bill, and that's still being figured out. And, of course, we haven't gotten to the pay-fors. Will there be a change in SALT, the state and local taxes that moderates in the House really want to see changed? We know that Senator Sinema has some issues with some of the tax increases. So how you pay for all of this, that we're not hearing a lot about yet.
All right, so Tim, Chris says unclear, right, on climate right now, but can you just lay out the stakes here? Because when it comes to a climate agenda here, Joe Biden has been very vocal about, his commitment to this, and I wonder, as these negotiations continue here, just how fraught have those particular discussions when it comes to climate and clean energy? How fraught have those discussions been?
Well, there's a huge challenge for him in that he needs every single Democrat, and one of the most powerful Democrats there is comes from one of the country's leading producers of coal and coal-fired power. And so to make advancements on climate change, you both have to convince Joe Manchin in the Senate to join 49 other Democrats and vote for it, but also present him something that he can vote for. And that's an incredibly tight needle for this White House and other allies in the Democratic Party to thread. The other thing that I'll mention is that not only does he have to contend with this audience domestically and get every senator on board, but the deadline that's coming up at the end of the month is important internationally. There is the biggest international climate conference that we've seen in years in Glasgow. The president will be there for the 1st of November. And if he wants to make progress on climate change, that has to be with international partners. The U.S. cannot do it alone. President Biden has said that many times. He's acknowledged that. And his strategy is to make sure that he shows the U.S. is doing something, is taking concrete action in order to get credibility internationally. It's something that the U.S. hasn't had a whole lot of. The U.S. policy on climate change has changed repeatedly, going back for decades. And if there's not legislation that comes through Congress through this reconciliation package, which would be a huge amount of spending, an unprecedented amount for the U.S. On climate change, he's limited in what he can take to international partners to get them on board. So it's, as I said, a very tight, unusual thread, but on several fronts, not just one.
Well, Tim, you mentioned Senator Manchin. He has vocally opposed a clean electricity plan. President Biden has had several meetings with him. I'm just wondering, do we know at this point whether or not there is a component of a climate initiative or some element dealing with climate that we know Senator Manchin is willing to accept? Or is this, at this point in the negotiation process, appearing as though Senator Manchin is not moving at all on this issue of climate?
I wouldn't say that he's not moving at all, but he is also keeping his red lines pretty tightly out of the public realm. I don't think he has made it entirely clear what is acceptable to him and what is not. Obviously, that's something that he probably wants to do. That's a path that he wants to chart in order to ensure that he has a lot of leverage here. Yesterday, we did hear from the president saying that it seemed like the clean electricity plan that you mentioned is out. Obviously, that we reported last week that is because Senator Manchin has told people in the administration, certainly in the Senate, that he doesn't support it. A carbon tax, that was something else that we reported yesterday, and it is likely out. One thing that seems very important from what we can tell for Senator Manchin is that he can't have things that directly lead to the closing of coal-fired power plants, of more coal-fired power plants, or shut off further coal production. Those are things that are incredibly important to West Virginia. And some of the things that we're talking about, those two things in particular, are things that would, the political opponents could probably say will directly lead to the closing of those plants and that production, that really integral part of the West Virginia economy. And so one thing I would say that I look for is more tax credits. If this gets done, the supporters, the people who are optimistic about this, say that tax credits first, second, and third for new deployment, new capacity is at the top of the list of what's likely to stay.
So for existing power plants to try these new technologies, cleaner technologies, are moving and expanding essentially, but not necessarily sort of reducing what already may exist, especially in the case of West Virginia, as you say, no closures of plants. Natalie, let me turn to you. Democrats want some sort of a win heading toward the midterms. New polling from Politico and Morning Consult shows that just 38% of voters say the country is heading in the right direction. So how much rides on getting this deal done by the end of the month?
Look, for the 2022 midterms to go their way, Democrats are going to need everything to go right. Just the way the congressional maps are, historical trends with what happens the year after a presidential election, Democrats are already at odds. And so for that much of the country, given all of that, to think that things aren't going in the right direction is certainly not what they want to see. And they've got to hope that they can get some of these items on their agenda passed, that they can get them implemented, and that they can have an impact, as well as, some lucky breaks for things to turn around. Those poll numbers have got to be really alarming. And remember, we're talking about 2022, but there's some elections coming up here in just a few weeks that may give us an early sense of how things are going to go for them.
Well, Chris, of course, the spending bill passing in Congress hinges on, as we just heard there, all of the Democratic senators voting for the bill. We've seen Senators Manchin and Sinema, oppose various versions of this bill throughout the process. The president called both of them earlier today, and members of their caucus are calling on them to get this done. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
What I would say to all of my Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate alike, this is a critical piece of legislation that we have to get across the finish line. But I think that would probably be well known to every single member of my caucus. We know that we are investing in the future of America. We are making investments now in our crumbling infrastructure, in childcare, and getting rid of the state and local tax deduction cap. Investments that are going to move this country forward for decades to come.
Do we know where Senators Manchin and Sinema stand on the overall framework?
Well, I don't know that anyone knows where Senator Sinema stands on the framework. She rarely talks to reporters and doesn't sound like she's talking to a lot of her colleagues here on the Hill. Her office has said she's interfacing directly with the White House. Senator Manchin, we have a better idea where Senator Manchin stands because he talks to us many, many times a day. I think he's been clear that the negotiations are continuing, that there are things in there that he doesn't fully support. Climate change, obviously, as we've heard in this discussion, remain a big factor. We know for Senator Sinema, there were some of the tax